Hey guys, um, this video is going to be very different from other videos that I've done. This is going to be focusing on what's going on with the Pac-12, Big Ten, Big 12, SEC, all of that. So Oregon and Washington signed to move to I think it's the Big Ten. Most people are commenting on how this is more of a football move. Um, But the reality is, you got to be looking at it from also not just football, but there's other sports as well: baseball, basketball, etc., etc. And I think there's more of a talk in that aspect of why even this happened. Um, and a lot of people are confused. And as far as for rivalries, so I'm just looking at, obviously, I'm an Oregon State fan. Um, I do think the Oregon State rivalry is historical, it's tradition. It's very odd seeing how this is playing out because it doesn't. Even looking, I was decided to look into, like, let's say, I'll do football last, but in baseball, Oregon State has completely obliterated Oregon in baseball. Like just from 2023 to 2009, 45 wins for Oregon State, 24 losses for Oregon in in those games. And Oregon State, they've won national titles for that, or national championships. They have a very strong baseball program. Um, and also looking into basketball. Why not look into basketball? Because it's a little odd to me. Because looking at basketball, so Oregon has completely decimated Oregon State. Oregon State men's basketball. And for baseball, obviously it's men's, but for basketball, Oregon's just been way better. However, Oregon State, they did have a good run for in the past. If we get further back, this is only from 95 to 2023. Um, because it's interesting because I mean when Oregon State made it to the top four, I believe, with Gary Payton. They had a pretty strong team then, but even going back further, they had a strong team. Or I think Oregon has beaten Oregon State more often. But when we go into women's basketball, Oregon State has just always dominated Oregon. Um, it's just, I mean, from 2000 to 2023, Oregon State has beaten Oregon more often. So, and I'll do lastly Oregon State for football. Um, so so the big talk has been for football. Well, Oregon, I think, has one more. Well, it's very, very close, actually, um, because Oregon had a pretty good run in the early years, all the way up to 1916. No, 1919, and then there was ties, and then Oregon State was winning a lot. Oregon State really has dominated the 1920s. Um, the later years of the 30s, the 40s. completely the 40s, the 50s, until the later years, but even then they were still dominant. Completely owned the 60s into the 70s. Oregon only won once. And then Oregon started doing well in the 70s all the way into the 80s and the 90s. And then Oregon State and Oregon kind of was trading wins and losses. They were from 97 to 2006. They were shared, like one year they would win, the next year they wouldn't. And then in 07, Oregon State won again. And then from 08 to 15, Oregon won. But it's interesting because I'm actually really, really surprised at how close they were. But either way, so Oregon and Washington have moved to the Big Ten. That's been the big news. I think what's interesting, and I think it doesn't make any sense, is that's killing off most likely the rivalry of Oregon State. Same with Washington State. Washington State, they're in a bigger problem because their sports program just wasn't as competitive with the rival as much, from what I know. But I'm not a Washington or a Washington State fan. But just looking at Oregon State, it doesn't make sense. Women's basketball, which I know probably not a lot of people are watching, but Oregon State has had a really good women's basketball team. The men's basketball team just hasn't been that great. Baseball, which has gotten lots of coverage, Oregon State's just been really, really good. Then for football, their program's is getting better. It's bouncing back up. They had 10 wins last year, and they could do it. They have a very good chance of doing it again this year. I think this year is actually the best year that the Oregon State could really take it very far. I think that there's an argument there of they could only have one loss or even no losses, which would be very interesting. They have some great players that they have been able to get from other schools, like the quarterback that came out of that left Clemson. That's a 5-star recruit. What the coach has done, really just turning the program around. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I also think it'll be interesting to see what happens this year in football. That might make some changes, some sways on where Oregon State will go. Because if Oregon State does really good, even making it, like, if they are just out of the playoffs, or even if they make it to the playoffs, that would be crazy. If they make it to the playoffs, and I think it's weird to even be thinking that way, but say they do, then what happens? Is the Big Ten going to try to get Oregon State? Is the Big 12 going to try to get them? Is the SEC going to make a move? The only thing I can think that makes any ounce of sense is maybe the ACC or the Mountain West. ACC, that's a long shot, but I mean SEC and Big Ten is an even longer shot. SEC, if they wanted to get Oregon State, that would just be because it would be like a slap to Big Ten, just having Oregon on one and Oregon State on the other. I don't think that's going to happen. That would be hilarious if it did, but yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this in the playoffs, because the whole bracket's completely that they had just put out earlier. That whole bracket that they created is completely toast because Pac-12 only has 4 teams. I was trying to think of if there's any way that the Pac-12 could try to get other teams. It really seems like that at this stage with only 4 teams, there's no way that they're going to be able to do that. Although, I think it would be something that I think if the Pac-12 doesn't react in fear, they're doing something. I think that they have a plan up their sleeve. But to be honest, I don't know. It's really a question mark as to what the Pac-12 is even doing. Oregon, Washington State, Cal, they're all really behind the Pac-12. And they really want to stick with the Pac-12. It's going to be interesting. And then what like I said, with the rivalries like Washington State, if Washington is in the Big 12, are they going to add, will they add potentially a rivalry game of Washington State? Allow that for the rivalry to keep going? Same with Oregon State. I think in a sense that would be the only way that they kind of make, if they make something like that possible, that could potentially put the Big Ten into a more favorable position with the teams. But I mean, Big Ten is actually, a lot of the fans are very, very surprised by this and didn't want this. People that are already in the Big Ten, fans of the teams are already in the Big Ten. It doesn't make any ounce of sense to anyone. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting, that's for sure.